Today we're going to be making some hardwood footed shafts, so stick around. All right, so for this demonstration we're going to be using some Sitka Spruce shafts, and we're going to be footing them with walnut. Now, I'm using walnut because that's what I have here around the shop, and it's going to make a really nice contrast. It's a dark hardwood, and it's going on very light colored shafts, so you're really going to see those footings stick out. There's a lot of different hardwoods that you can use. You can make your own hardwood footing splices, which I'm going to show you how to do, or you can buy footing splices already made from Three Rivers. Now, the techniques that we're going to use are going to work, they'll work for any wood shaft. Now, the reason that I have chosen Sitka Spruce for this build is because Sitka Spruce for the spine and the diameter is a very lightweight wood. And we're actually going to go through the entire process of building some fairly high FOC arrows with all natural or all natural materials. And so a lot of that stuff, we're going to be tail tapering these things. A lot of this stuff is going to be covered in future videos. And so if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss out on those videos when they come up. So I'm going to be using a little footing jig that I got from Three Rivers. This thing, if I remember correctly, is about 80 bucks, and it actually works pretty good. It's a little bit finicky to get set up. I'm going to be using this thing on a drill press, but you can also use it on a router table. So if you've got a drill press or a router table, this thing is going to work just fine for you. Now, getting it set up is a little bit tricky because you have to, the tolerances that you're working with are not real great. You've got to have that router bit sticking down in this thing far enough so that it cuts your wings narrow enough so that when you stick them up in your splices, you don't have big gaps in there that are filled up with glue. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here in just a minute. All right, so the first thing that you're gonna have to do is get your fence on whatever you're working with, your router table or your drill press set up so that you can slide this thing through there consistently every single time. Now, the other thing that I will mention is I've got my drill press set to the highest RPMs it'll go, so it's going to be turning this router bit fairly quickly. If you have it set too low, it's going to want to grab the wood and turn this thing, and if it does that, it'll ruin your shaft. And which brings up a great point. When you first start this process, do it with junk shafts because you're probably going to mess some up before you get the hang of it. It does take a little bit of practice to get everything, to get the feel right and to get everything set just right. And so take a scrap shaft or a broken arrow or something like that and chuck it up in this thing and run it through a couple times, make a footing or make the cuts, cut that off and then do it again, and just do that until you feel confident that you can get this thing cutting straight and you're not messing anything up. Now, how I set this thing is I went ahead and put a shaft in this and left about a ½ inch of gap in there. Now that allows you to clamp down and get these jaws at the right width apart. Now set this thing on there and slide it just till this router bit is kind of right in the end of those two jaws there. And you can turn this thing so that you can see the tolerance, you can see the clearance between the edge of this jaw and the edge of your cutting bit right there. And you want it very, very close, but not so close that it's gonna touch. I would say less than a 1/16 of an inch. A 32nd of an inch, if you can get it if you can get it to a 32nd without it actually coming in contact with the jig, that's gonna be good because that is going to make the ends of those wings where it crosses, and that'll make sense in a minute, it's gonna make it very fine because if it's too thick, you're gonna have gaps between where your footing splices slide up on this thing. That'll make sense in a minute. Now, the easiest way that I've found to adjust the depth is not with the crank back here to raise the whole thing up and down, because that's not, the adjustment there isn't fine enough. And so what I did is just loosen the chuck here and drop your bit down just a little bit, because you can have very fine control making this go up and down just with the chuck here. A lot finer than trying to do it with this back here. All right, so once you get this thing set with some junk shafts, go ahead and take one of your good shafts, and you want to set it so that it's flush with the end of this thing. Now go ahead and turn on your router. All right, so this router bit is leaving a little bit of rough edges here. It's not doing a real clean cut. And so what I do is just take a file, put in there, match that angle, and just one or two little back and forth like that completely cleans that up. Now it's perfect. All right, so the instructions that come with this little footing jig tell you to draw a cross on here and on the end of your shaft, and then use that cross to line things up. But I really haven't found any need for that at all. I mean, you're eyeballing the cross, so why not just eyeball how this thing is lining up in the jig. Now, I cut my first cut, and then I turned the thing completely 180 degrees and basically split the difference. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So you got to really watch these two edges here and make sure that you're splitting the difference where they line up with these two pieces here. Now cut your second one. And again, if it didn't make a clean cut, just take your little file, couple of back and forth, and that's all it needs. Now rotate it 90 degrees. And again, just try to look at the end and split the difference, get everything even. And it's important that you get everything lined up just right, or your slots will be off. So that all looks good. Everything looks even. And now we can move on to making our footing splices. I want to interrupt for just a few seconds to talk about this Patreon thing that I've mentioned in every video that I've done for the past year or so. And because I think it's got people a little bit confused, they don't really know what it is, and they don't ever take the time to go and look at it. So I'm going to put up a link in the video description, and I'm also going to put one up here somewhere at the top of this video. All you got to do is click that, and it'll take you to the Patreon site so you can look around. But you can think of Patreon kind of like Netflix for bowyers, kinda. All it is basically is a membership site where you can go and sign up and you can get exclusive content that you're never going to find anywhere else. It's only, I'm making content just for the Patreon site. And so up until now, it's been mostly bow building type stuff, but we're going to be expanding into other areas of traditional archery, arrow tuning, bow tuning, shooting. Basically, we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about on that site, and I can make videos about whatever you guys want me to cover. But anyway, for about what it would cost you to go to a fast food restaurant and get a greasy hamburger and French fries, you can get access to all this exclusive content. So think about your health. Don't go get the fast food restaurant burger. Go to Patreon and get some awesome content. All right, so we're ready to start on the footing splices now. So I've got a couple of pieces of walnut here that I've sawn to 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, and they're about 8 inches long. And then I've got a line up here that's 5 inches from the end. And so that's how far I'm going to saw these slots to be able to make the fingers that are going to slide over the end of the shaft. Now, if you have a taper jig or a footing jig that is cutting longer wings, you just need to cut your slots a little bit longer than however long your wings are, or your slots are for them to fit in. And so that little footing jig there cuts these slots about 4.5 inches long. And so I've made this line at 5 inches so that I can have a little bit of extra play. Now the fence on my little saw here, I've got set at about 1/4 inch so that it's going to saw this thing directly in half. I'm going to saw a slot right down the middle of this thing to my line, then I'm going to back out, I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to saw another slot right to that line again. So we're going to have a 4-pronged little splice here. All right, so now we've got our footing splice cut, we've got our shaft prepped and ready to accept the splice. Now what we need to do is to go ahead and take some good high quality wood glue. And I've got some Titebond 3 here, which works really well. And open this up just a little bit. You don't want to put too much pressure on there because you don't want to split it. But take a little wood glue, put in there, and then take a little sliver of something, paper or piece of scrap wood, and work that glue right way down into that splice so that it gets everywhere. And then again, do the same thing in the other direction. You want to make sure you get everything in there coated really good. Now, I've got some little just squeeze clamps here. Little bitty C-clamps will work just fine. But you want to clamp this at the base where you stopped your cut. Because when you put this shaft up in there, it's going to want to split this this footing splice, and so you got to put a lot of pressure on there to keep that thing from splitting. You want to clamp it in both directions. Set that aside, and then I'm going to run a little bit of glue up in these slots that we cut. All the way up those fingers. All right, so now all we got to do is slide this right up in there. Until it butts up to the end. It might be a little bit difficult. If it is, just take something and bump it down in there till it's flush. And you can feel it when it seats down in there. So now what you want to do is go ahead and just take a string and wrap around here so it holds all those wings down tight against the shaft. And then just set it aside and let it dry. All right, so I've got a shaft here where the glue is dry, and we're gonna go ahead and continue on with the process. Now, I'm gonna use a belt sander to reduce the majority of the material on this stuff. I've got a belt sander over here with 80 grit paper. And so I'm just gonna knock down the high edges on this and get it close. I'm not gonna try to take it down to the shaft diameter with power tools because it's very easy to get into the shaft itself and start reducing the actual shaft diameter. I'm gonna get it close with the belt sander, and then I'm gonna move to hand tools to finish it off. All right, so I've got this thing down pretty close with the belt sander, and now I'm just gonna move to hand tools to get this thing right down to the shaft diameter. All right, so I'm gonna start with a Nicholson number 50, which is actually a fairly coarse little rasp, and I'm just gonna knock the high spots off so I can get down a little bit closer. Now, when you're filing on these footing wings, if you're filing on top of the wing, you want to be careful not to flatten it out so much that you get down below the shaft diameter. And so what I do is turn it sideways so that I'm filing across two of them, and then that way I can get right down to the shaft diameter without actually going into the shaft, and I know that I still have enough material on the actual hardwood shaft or the hardwood footing so that I'm not making flat spots in it. So now I'm going to move to a little bit less aggressive file. And I'll start rotating this thing a little bit to get some of those high spots off of the footing itself. It helps if you file at about a 45 or a pretty good angle, just so you're not cutting across and making little divots in there. If you file at a 45, you kind of span a lot more of that shaft, and it's a lot easier to keep it nice and steady. All right, so now I've got it down pretty close with the rasp and file. Now what I'm going to do is just go ahead and chuck this end in a drill. Get it squared up as good as you can get it. And now I've got some 80 grit sandpaper that I'm just going to hold around it and take this thing right down to the shaft diameter. So you want to get down below all the glue and everything that's on the shaft. There you go. Very nice looking walnut hardwood footed shaft.